Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder how our brains handle talking to many people at once, especially if they all know different things? This study dives deep into that, looking at how people with brain injuries communicate differently in group settings, compared to those without. It is fascinating because it uses not just words, but also gestures and eye movements to figure it out. This is a mouthful, right? But the core idea is simple. When you talk to a group, you have to think about what each person knows. This is called audience design. Most studies have only looked at spoken words, but this research asks, what about hand gestures and where we look? And how does this work change if someone has had a moderate to severe traumatic brain injury, or TBI? Imagine you are explaining something to your super smart friend and your cousin who is just learning about it. You'd probably explain it differently to each, right? In a group, it is even trickier because you have to manage all those different knowledge levels at the same time. Previous research showed that people with TBI have a harder time adjusting their spoken words for different audiences in a group. But what about their body language? Like gestures and eye gaze. So how did they test this? They had two groups of people, one group of 30 adults who had experienced a moderate to severe traumatic brain injury at least 6 months prior, and another group of 30 people without any brain injury. They were all matched for things like age and education, which is super important for making sure the results are fair. These participants played a game where they had to describe pictures to two helpers called matchers. There were two main parts to the game. First, called the sorting phase, they describe the same pictures over and over. This helps them build up what researchers call common ground, basically figuring out what the helpers already know. Then came the test phase. This is where things got interesting. They described the pictures again, but this time to two different pairs of matchers. One pair knew all about the pictures, knowledgeable. Another pair knew nothing, naive. And the third pair was a mix, one knew, one didn't. The key here is that the speakers weren't told whether the matchers were knowledgeable or naive. They had to figure it out based on how the game was set up and maybe how the matchers acted. To measure the gestures, they used really cool technology called motion tracking. Think of it like a super accurate video analysis tool that tracks the exact movements of the hands. This allowed them to measure things like how high the gestures were, how large an area they covered, and even how complex the movements were. For eye gaze, they had people carefully watch the videos to see where each person was looking. This gave them a really detailed picture of how people communicated, not just with words, but also through their actions and eye movements. Now, what did they find? When the non-injured folks talked, they really did adjust across the board. Their words, their gestures, and their eye gaze all seemed to work together. They made their descriptions clearer with gestures and looked at the people who seemed to know less to check if they were following along. It was like a well-oiled machine. But here is the striking difference. The participants with TBI, even though they struggled a bit with spoken language adjustments in this specific game setup, they were still able to adjust their gestures. They made their gestures more elaborate and used their eye gaze to focus on the people who were less knowledgeable. This suggests that even with some challenges from brain injury, their ability to understand and react to who knows what in a group was still there, especially when it came to visual communication. Interestingly, the group with TBI actually used gestures more often than the non-injured group, especially when talking to someone knowledgeable. This might seem counterintuitive, but in the discussion, they explore why this might be. It could be that gestures become a more important tool for them, perhaps to help organize their thoughts or compensate for other communication challenges. So, what is the big takeaway? This study really hammers home that communication isn't just about words. When we're looking at how people communicate, especially those with conditions like TBI, we absolutely need to consider gestures and eye gaze. For people with TBI, it seems there is a complex picture. They might struggle with some aspects, like spoken language adjustments in certain contexts, but show surprising strength in others, like using gestures and gaze strategically in groups. This tells us that even when one communication channel is affected, others might step up, offering a more resilient way to connect. This research is also groundbreaking because it is the first time they've really looked at the detailed movement-based qualities of gestures in people with TBI using advanced motion tracking. It shows how this technology can reveal subtle differences and similarities that we wouldn't pick up just by watching. They even draw parallels to studies with people who have amnesia, suggesting that different cognitive impairments can lead to these varied patterns of adjustment across different communication methods. It's like the brain finds different workarounds through different channels. What this really means is that just focusing on speech for people with TBI might give us an incomplete and maybe even misleading picture of their communication skills. When we look at speech, gesture, and eye gaze together, we get a much richer, more accurate understanding. It suggests that for people with TBI, gestures and eye gaze might be particularly important for navigating complex social situations. The researchers propose an interesting idea. Maybe the higher gesture rate in the TBI group is a way their brain redistributes the effort. If speaking is a bit harder, the brain might lean more on gestures to get the message across. This is similar to what is seen in people with aphasia, where gestures often carry information that speech alone can't. While TBI is different from aphasia, a word, finding difficulties are common, so this could be a compensation strategy. An important point they make is that the TBI group gestured a lot, even when the other person already knew what they were talking about. This suggests gestures aren't only used to help the listener. They might also be helping the speaker themselves focus, organize their thoughts, or manage cognitive load. It's like gesturing helps them think better. Looking ahead, the researchers are keen to dig deeper. They suggest making the tasks even more challenging, like by having people switch between talking to someone knowledgeable and someone naive more rapidly, or increasing the number of people in the group. This could reveal even more about how TBI affects complex communication. Now, no study is perfect. One limitation here is that they use 2D video to track gestures, which means they couldn't capture the full depth of movement. They couldn't tell if a gesture was coming forward towards the listener or staying close to the body. Future studies could use 3D motion capture to get that extra layer of detail. Overall, this is a really important piece of work. It challenges the idea that communication disorders after TBI are uniform. Instead, it shows a much more nuanced picture where different communication channels can behave differently. It suggests a remarkable resilience in our multimodal communication system. Even when parts are injured, the brain can find ways to adapt and keep communicating, often by leaning more heavily on the modalities that are still functioning well, like gesture and eye gaze. What this really tells us is that a one-size-fits-all approach to understanding or treating communication difficulties after brain injury just won't cut it. We need to look at the whole picture, the whole person, and the whole way they communicate. What are your thoughts on this? Does it surprise you that people with TBI might use gestures more effectively than with spoken words in some situations? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this as fascinating as I did, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science breakdowns, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the wonders of the human mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.